Hello and welcome to another Tech Talk Thursday. I'm Marquina and I'll be your presenter for today's video tutorial. Today's video will be one of three in a series where I'm going to walk you through how we can build a Synapse pipeline to handle both full and incremental loads using Data Lake for our control table. If you're new and don't want to miss subsequent videos, please consider subscribing and tossing a like if you feel you've learned something today. So in this first video, I want to start by laying down some groundwork of building our control table for our Synapse pipelines to use. Now for this scenario, let's imagine that we're not using a relational database such as Azure DB or even something like a dedicated pool. But instead, we're going to use our data lake to act as our storage layer to house our inserts and updates for our control table. This is where Delta Lake comes into the picture. Now some of you might be asking, what is Delta Lake? Well, Delta Lake is an open storage framework that works with Spark, Hive, Python, and many other data engines. This technology is going to allow us to work seamlessly within Synapse Studio to achieve the desired results of working with control tables in a traditional database setting. So let's start coding. Here on my screen, I am in the Azure portal. I'm just going to navigate over to my Synapse Studio and open it up. Now we will be coding in notebooks, so I will navigate over to the developer tab, click the plus icon, and search for notebook. I'm going to give the notebook a name. We'll call this notebook control table. Capitalize that. And here's where we have some great flexibility within notebooks. We can select our language, right? We could write this in Python. We could write it in Spark SQL. I'm most comfortable with Spark SQL, so this is the language that I'm going to use. And then we can start coding. What's nice about using the Spark SQL language is it's going to be very familiar to those of you who are accustomed to working within traditional databases. So I'm just going to write my create statement, create table. We'll call this control table demo. We're just going to define the schema. So I'm going to say we're going to need an ID. This will be an integer value. I'm going to want a schema name to capture. Say that this is of type string. I'll want a table name, also string. We'll want a created date time, which would be timestamp. Let's see, we're also going to want a watermark, right, to kind of capture the modifications that take place. Date time. And then lastly, I'm going to want a flag to let me know whether or not this will be an initial load or incremental. So we'll say is initial load, and this will be a Boolean type. Now the last part, in order for us to leverage the Delta Lake framework here, is we'll have to have another clause saying using Delta. All right, and that should be it. So I'm going to run this cell. And while that's running, I am going to start inserting some data into this table here. We'll say insert into, and now I'm just going to start adding my values. I'm going to just add two records here. So we'll add the ID, the schema name. The first table that I'm going to want to insert will be called vessel. We'll use the now function to get me the current date time, or the time that we created it. We'll say null for the watermark, and then is this an initial load? We'll say true. So I'm going to copy this because I'm going to use this for my second row. So we'll just make a couple updates here. The second table that I'm going to want to bring over is called ports. All right, and let me see. I think I have one too many. Parentheses, and let me run this. All right, You can see that the job has finished executing. So one thing that I want to show is what's happening behind the scenes. Where's this data going, and what's so special about Data Lake that is allowing me to work within the data lake to kind of illustrate that this is a table, right? What's allowing me to work with this as a table? So if I go to the data tab and I go to linked, right under here I have the Azure Storage account. Now because I didn't specify a path, this is going to go to that root directory that was created when you provision your data lake. And we're going to go to warehouse. And this is where you can see that control table gets created. And one thing that I want to call out is because we're using Delta, we're going to get this Delta log. Now, this is going to be responsible for tracking the changes that you've made to this table. For instance, if I were to do a select top 100 rows off of this Parquet file, right, you can see that this is one row. If I were to go back and do it again for this one, you'll see that second row that was added. Again, this is tracking those changes. The way that we're going to want to use this is if I go to the control table itself and say select top 100 rows, now I can select the file type. And in this case, I'm going to use Delta format. What this does is this allows me to query just up to the control table, not the Parquet files, so that I can see what was done all kind of in one path, so to speak. So to kind of really illustrate the point, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to make an update to this table. I'm going to add a code here, and let's update this control table. So let's write the update statement. And we're going to set this initial load flag from true to false. Instead of 1, we'll put 0. And behind the scenes, if we go back to that root directory, now we see that there are 4 files that have taken effect, right? There are 4 files that have been added in total, 2 additional files. So again, if I select top 100 rows from Parquet, you're going to see that this is going to show that I have ID 2, or our port table has been updated to false, right? But one thing to note is if I were to use this Parquet format and not use Delta Lake, and I were to say something like, right, give me all my data, we'll be able to see all our changes, right? So this may not make sense for you. So you can see that, right, I have 2 values, which are changes that I have made. Right? I've added the vessel initially with an is initial load flag as true, and then we've updated this vessel to say false. And we did the exact same thing for port. So what we'll want to do in this particular case so that we can leverage Delta and get those latest changes is we're going to want to select that format of Delta. And then we only want up until the control table portion. And if I run this, right, this will natively handle what the latest executions were, and that's because of that log file. So this would be a perfect candidate for how we can use this as our control table to update these values after we've had a successful run. So let me go back to our notebook, and I'm going to switch this back to 1, because what we're going to do next is we're going to create our Synapse pipeline to use this table, and we're going to write some expression logic to leverage this flag to determine what query we write. So stay tuned for the next video. Thank you so much for tuning in for today's video. I hope you learned of something of value, and we're going to see you in the next one. Bye-bye.